I'd like to welcome you to the first of the sessions that we've created, the Practice Discipleship Team for the ELCA Gathering. And the title for this one is called Opportunity or Despair. You decide. Youth Ministry at the Crossroads. It is the shared hope of us as the leadership team that those of you seeking to be faithful and effective in ministry with, for, and among young people would join in this opportunity to kind of learn about what was going on and to be encouraged and empowered for the work that you're about. I want to start with this story. Recently, I had the privilege of teaching a class in Las Vegas, Nevada. I had grown up in Southern California, and in the 70s, I had the opportunity to do the road trip from Southern California down, and in fact, it was late at night, and so all of the glitter and stuff of the 70s Strip was glowing. I remember as a kid driving down Las Vegas Strip. I knew a little bit about what it was about. As a elementary school student, that was about all I knew, was gambling and a few other things. Since then, I've had the opportunity to hear snippets and stories of how Las Vegas has changed and whatnot, but I hadn't actually been back to Las Vegas for decades. And so as I was preparing for this class, I thought, you know, I could operate with Las Vegas from my elementary school days and my picture of it in the 70s with these kind of snippets, or I could do a little more research. So guess what I did? I thought I better do some more research and learned about all of the new things going on the Strip and all of these just extravagant kind of things going on in Las Vegas. One piece of a puzzle around what Las Vegas is would not have gotten me there. One piece was just not enough. What I needed to do is kind of get caught up. Some of the things that I knew didn't change, but some of the things had changed dramatically. And part of my success, actually, about engaging with students around doing ministry in Las Vegas was bridging those two pieces of information. Well, I'm here to tell you that youth ministry has changed in the last 50 to 60 years. And some of the things that were vibrant in past decades, like Luther League, and some of the things that you maybe have, okay, some of us maybe experienced or heard of people that's been vibrant for, had a time and place. But as the culture has changed, as we've changed, as youth ministries changed, so have the different forms around how we engage in meaningful discipleship with young people. And one of the things that I want to lift up is that while the forms may change, and that's a good thing, just like in Vegas, there's some things that stayed the same, there's some things that stay the same in youth ministry as well. Like, for example, relationships with young people matter. Congregations matter. Worship matters. Studying scripture matters. A lot of the things that we hold close to us around what it is to be a people of faith still matter. But we need to honor the past while we're also being attentive to what's going on and changing around us, so that we can be faithful to our calling to do what we've been asked to do in ministry as we go into the future. I don't want to be held captive to the images of the past to keep us from going to where we need to go. You're here. Thanks for being here. Because you know what? You matter. And if you hear nothing else in this session, I want you to know that you matter. You matter because for some reason you're here because you care about young people. And you know what? Not everybody would take time out of their life. I bet you have other places you could be, to be here, to be about this work that we're about. So, not only do you care about young people, but you're willing to invest in some way in them. Not only for a short period of time, but in months, and then even maybe getting on a bus or flying in a plane or whatever to travel with them to some new places. So, thanks for being here, and we hope to help equip you for that role. In our time today, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give you a quick overview of what's happening with young people with regard to their faith life and the practices that are meaningful to them. Why? Because the landscape has changed a bit, and we want you to know that. Second, we think this is a time of opportunity. We've all seen different pictures, but this is certainly a big opportunity that we have to engage young people in a faith that matters. And we want to talk a little bit about that. And we really think, those of us on this writing team, and a lot of the other people planning around this event, this is a great adventure to join. And we are excited about that. And finally, we're going to give you some things, some information and some tools to equip you to join in this venture, to walk into this place, whether you're brand new to working with young people, or whether you're a veteran, or whether you're somewhere in the middle. Our format today will be a variety of things. We'll have some clips, some video and DVD clips. We're going to have some presentations done live, and then we're going to have some activities that you do together. In addition to what we're going to present here, there's a variety of things for those of you that want to go deeper that we can give you the opportunity to do, whether they're books or websites or DVDs or whatever. So with that said, let's begin. Are you ready? Yeah. All right, I introduced myself. I'm Terri Elton. I'm here. I live about 10 minutes south of here in Apple Valley. And I want to know who you are. Isn't that exciting? So you get a chance to join in on this. So I want you, there's some paper that's been passed around. Some big sheets of paper. I have a yellow one. Are you with me? Okay. I want you to take two of them, and I'm going to ask you to do three things with these two pieces of paper. Number one, on the first one, I want you to write fairly good size your name and the congregation that you're from. And on that same piece of paper, I want you to write a high school memory you have of church. There you go. All right. Some of us, that's a ways back. We can do this. All right. On a second sheet of paper, I want you to write, without your name or anything, one hope that you have for youth today, especially as you think about discipleship and fostering a faith that matters in our world today. So I'm going to give you about 1.5 minutes to do that. And then when you're done, you're going to walk to the back, and there's two papers. On this side, I want you to put your name and high school experience paper. And on that side where it says hope, you tape your other one. Are you with me? Go. In case you forgot, here are the goals that we have for you today. One is we're going to give you a sense of the landscape of what's going on with the faith and religious life of youth today. Second, we're going to talk about and help you discover what some of the findings say about what it is to nurture young people in discipleship today. And that will lead us to the third thing that will give us some clues as to some future opportunities that we have when we're working with young people. So with that, let's go back to thinking about the landscape. Some of you might have had experiences like I did in Las Vegas, where you know a moment, but you don't know the current state of what a place is. And you kind of know things have changed, but you kind of don't know how. Well, there's a sense, I think, with youth ministry that some of us have dropped into youth ministry at different parts of our time. Maybe we had a chance to be a part of a group or a ministry that was really vibrant or important in our lives. Maybe we had a little time that we got to volunteer or be a part of a ministry that was significant, but it's been some time. I know that when I left full-time ministry and went back to school and did some other things and was not actively in the lives of kids, it wasn't long before I felt the disconnect between what was going on the ground. Many of us working with children, youth, and family are doing what we can to help bring people into the conversation and update them on what the current landscape is, because we feel that currently we've been through a time when a lot of change has happened. And we all have these past experiences, but if we don't bring them into conversation with what we know now, we're missing a key component to that. And so tonight, we're going to look at this research from two vantage points. One is we're going to look at it from the air. 2 national studies have been done looking at the state of faith with young people. One of them is the National Study of Youth and Religion. There are 33 million teenagers in the U.S. today. And the National Study of Youth and Religion was a longitudinal study that set out over 10 years to try and discover what was going on with the faith and spirituality of those students, of those young people. They began their interviews in 2003 and now have done several versions of following those students within that. What I want to do today is highlight some of the findings from that 2003 reporting out of what was going with teenagers. This research had both phone interviews, which were more in-depth, and some face-to-face interviews, which are more in-depth, and then some phone interviews, which are along that period of time. Here's just a quick piece. 85% of the young people that they talked to said they believe in God. A third of the young people were regular participants in a faith community. A third were sporadically, and a third really weren't connected. There's some good news and some bad news here. But what we want to do today is give you 5 high-level learnings about what they found about the particularities of these students. So, 5 learnings. First, teens are not rebellious about faith. Rather, they're pretty open to religion. Many adults, I have to admit, I've been one of them, in the past decade have lived under kind of 2 false pretenses, and this is one of them. That young people will rebel against their faith. That's part of what their job is. To say no to the institution of faith, to say no to their parents' faith, to say no to kind of traditional ideas of what faith is about. This study, however, found that not to be a reality. In fact, not only did 85% believe in God, but overall, students said there's positive parts to having a faith. There are moral implications there. There are societal reasons to be a part of it. But what was interesting was a couple things. First, youth are not flocking to alternative religions, all right? Yet this faith that they have doesn't really seem to be that vital or central to their daily choices, to their overall frame. It's not taking the most amount of time in their life. Now, another good. The vast majority of teenagers identified themselves as Christian, either Protestant or Roman Catholic, or as Jewish or Mormon. Some pretty traditional ways of thinking about religious categories. Only 8% of the students that they surveyed said faith was not important at all, even of that third that wasn't connected to a faith community in any way. Only 8% said no. There's a second piece. This faith that they have is called Moralistic Therapeutic Deism. And we're going to watch a clip of Christian Smith, the director from this study, explain this a little bit in this video. Moralistic Therapeutic Deism. God exists who created and orders the world and watches over human life on earth. God wants people to be good, nice, and fair to each other, as taught in the Bible and by most world religions. The central goal of life is to be happy and to feel good about oneself. God does not need to be particularly involved in one's life, except when God is needed to resolve a problem. And finally, good people go to heaven when they die. This creed, so to speak, is kind of taken out of any historical context or tradition, particular tradition, that has been passed down across time. And it has very little theological depth. So when the realities of the world push into this, there's not a real vibrancy in order to engage this faith into what is actually happening in real time. For example, grace is a key issue, theological reality for us as Lutherans. When it was asked of these young people their idea of grace, the most common answer connected to that was the TV show current at the time, Will and Grace. Moralistic Therapeutic Deism. Number 3, teens could not speak the second language of faith. The vast majority of teens, when asked to speak about their faith, were incredibly inarticulate about not only their faith, their religious beliefs, and their practices. In our time today, faith is a foreign language. And so to learn the language of faith is to learn a second language. And young people are not catching the faith that these religions profess. In other words, faith communities are not passing on the faith in word and deed. Learning the language of faith will require, among other things, being immersed in a community, in a culture, where faith is spoken in the present tense, in the here and now, and where it is practice being spoken. Next, parents are important. This is the second common assumption that I think is out there, that the teen's faith and the adult faith are significantly different, and that how we nurture faith among adults is significantly different than how we nurture it among teens. And so we spend a lot of time talking about the differences. What this study shows and reflects is actually their faith and religious beliefs are actually quite similar. 3 out of 4 religious teens considered the beliefs similar, somewhat or very, with those of their parents. Parents, whether they knew it or not, liked it or not, are in fact always socializing youth about religion. Because the faith of the teens mirrors that of its parents, there's a whole broad spectrum. So it didn't matter if they were particularly religious or not. Whatever their practices were what was being mirrored. Even when they opened it up to say, you can make your own choices, the default was not that different than where the parents were. So it's not whether or not parents are passing on faith, it's what beliefs around religion are parents passing on. The last piece that is important for us to lift up here is there was a small percentage, 8% of teens, that said religion was important. Of that 2/3, 8%, the faith was not wallpaper. But it was actually an integrated and active part of their lives. Of these students, these are the kinds of students. This is the place where discipleship has actually made a difference in their lives. That is hopeful in some way, but it's an awful small percentage. So, I want us to go to the ground, come out of the air, land a little bit. That's a lot of information. And as Christian Smith, the director of this study, says, be careful to stereotype. Be careful to take these and go, well, okay, 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3, that's 1/3, that's 1/3, and 1/3. It's not that kind of a finding. We need to be open to listening and to cultivating and to discovering for ourselves what's true. So, your turn to get involved again. This time, I'd like you to get into groups of maybe 2 or 3 around your table. And there will be, if there's not, some Post-it notes that will be on there. And here's what I want you to do. As you think of young people today with regard to faith and spirituality, come up within your group with the 10 things that you would have that would describe these young people. They could be things that are continuous of the past, or they could be things that are different. They could be positive, or they could be with a negative tone. All right? I'm only going to give you about 2 minutes, so find your groups quickly and work to that, and their Post-its will show up. I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with each other. One of the things I think that's really important, whether we get it higher up from the air or whether we get it closer to the ground, is that we continue to share with each other what we are seeing and what we are observing, because one of the traps we can fall into is to overgeneralize what's happening in our neck of the woods, so to speak. And the other thing is we can also kind of assume we're the only one having this experience. And I think conversation like this, not only with these studies, but also with one another, can help put that in perspective for us. And so I encourage you throughout the time of this training to take some time to look at the things that you put up. Look at the top 10 list. Look at the experiences and the hopes that people have that helps frame this, not just with research, but actual real people that are a part of this process. So we've got it from the air. We're starting to get it from the ground. This second study that was looking at it more from the ground is kind of that inside the closet look at congregations from that small percentage of young people that had that 8% we talked about, that had that vibrant faith, that place where faith was not the wallpaper or just a part of the overall kind of framework, but it actually mattered in their journey. The Exemplar Youth Ministry study was a gathering of leaders from 7 denominations, and it was started about the same time the National Study of Youth and Religion was going on. The 7 denominations involved were the Assemblies of God, the Evangelical Covenant, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Presbyterian Church USA, the Roman Catholics, the Southern Baptists, and the United Methodists. And they too did surveys. They found congregations that had youth with a higher percentage, a high percentage. They had a way of figuring that out of mature Christian young people. And they had them do surveys of 4 different groups. They had youth, they had their parents, they had the volunteers working with that ministry, and they had the staff, the pastors, and the leaders of that congregation. Then they also did some deep listening. They went to 21 of the 131 congregations from those 7 denominations across the country. They picked a small, medium, and large in each of those 7 and did some deep listening and wanted to see what this looked like on the ground and with real stories. So with that, let's hear a little clip from 3 of the people that were on that research team. So what are some of the big learnings from the Exemplar Youth Ministry study? First, the point, why we're at this at all, it's about nurturing faith with young people. It's not about programs, it's not about the coolest band, the biggest budget, the fill in the blank. The work that we're about in congregations has to center on and keep reminding us it's about nurturing this faith. One of the things I think that's really helpful as I work with congregations around this is that sometimes we say, well, yeah, of course. But then, I don't know about you, I narrow what that looks like into a couple key things. Go to church, go to worship on a regular basis, be in Bible study. What this study helps us is to offer a robust view of what it takes, the aspects of walking with and nurturing a mature Christian faith. I know, for me as a parent, that's a really helpful piece. You might ask, well, where did they come up with these? Somebody ask. Where did they come up with these? Thank you, back table. They started with previous research. They brought together the primary 2 things that they used were the Effective Christian Education Study by Search Institute. That was in 1990. And then there was one before that, 5 Cries of Youth by Merton Strumman. They put these, and there were 34 aspects of this that they worked, and they clustered them into these, and this is what made up their set of questions and asked kinds of things around that. What was interesting is that the surveys were one piece, but as they went in and listened, those surveys weren't directing those questions, and as they listened, these same things emerged. So it validated this previous research, and it offers us a way of looking beyond. So I encourage you to sit and think about this. I have 2 children, 2 girls, they're both in high school. They are bent differently. I don't know how they both landed in my family, but they did. And This, for me as a parent, forget as an educator, forget as a person equipping people to do congregational ministry. As a parent, it challenges me to let them be who they are and to start from the places that they get most excited about. One, life of service. You know, confirmation kind of could do without, kind of going regular to worship. But she is in the world and she sees need, and that's where she gets hooked in. And then she starts asking God questions. It has been fun to see that ever since she was little. My other daughter does really well in a more traditional kind of way. This helps me widen and think about that in a broader way. So, 7 aspects of a mature Christian faith. There were some streams of things that were going on in these congregations. There were some particular theological bends that they had. Here's 3 of them. Sense of a presence of an active and living God. They were not museums. They went there and expected God to show up, and people talked like God did, and actually might in the future. The emphasis on spiritual growth, discipleship, and vocation, not only for young people, but that was a part of how these congregations were wired. And they promoted outreach and mission. Their eyes were beyond the congregation. Some particular qualities of ministry defined these congregations. They reflected and supported youth ministry. That was one thing. That was a constant theme. Second, they fostered significant relationships and a sense of community in all of their ministry pieces. Youth ministry was just a part of that. And they were committed to competent leadership. There was a sense of joining, and some of these were done by pastors. Some of these were done by, quote, professionals, people that were lay people that had been equipped. And a lot of these were done by Joe, Jane, whatever volunteer that look about as diverse as this room, perhaps. They were older people, they were younger people, they were couples, they were all over the board. There was no cookie cutter to this. Particular ministry practices, they brought into conversation households and families. They had some common practices around youth ministry that they did effectively. Mission trips, retreats, Bible studies, things like that. But they also all customized and integrated these approaches to what was going on in their place. And so from the outside, if you would have just set them alongside of each other, you wouldn't have seen one way of going about this ministry. So, last thing, they had some assets. And these assets, 44 of them, were clustered into 4 different spheres. There was a bunch you heard Wes on the video talk about in the congregation. And the theological view and the qualities of ministry that I highlighted are what was going on in that sphere. And in that sphere, there were 18 assets. Many of us have spent a lot of our time in youth ministry focusing on the youth ministry sphere. This study broke open that of 44, 18 of them had to do with the congregation as a whole. It's important that we're attached and we're in dialogue. Second, the age-specific or the youth ministry peer sphere had 6 of them. It was important that they weren't just brought into the congregation and there was nothing specific going on for young people to be with their peers. That's a significant piece. Family. It was significant that there was not only just overall congregational ministry, but there was some particular ministry focused on young people being with young people and paying attention to that life stage and the development that's particular. It wasn't the largest, but it had a group of ones. Third sphere was the family or the household. There were 5 assets in that area. How are we as congregations, how are we as youth ministry teams partnering with the home? And finally, leadership. Congregation was number 1, leadership was number 2, with 15 of the assets in those. And those assets had to do with congregational leadership, they had to do with youth ministry, they had to do with volunteers, they had to do with peer, they had to do with the home. They were all the way through all of those spheres. What happens when with these assets is that the goal is not to get all 44 and then you're there. The goal is nurturing a robust faith, a mature faith, right? But what happened was, when people had them spread out, they had assets in each of those spheres. They're created what Raleigh calls a sweet spot. They had fertile ground for this faith, because they'd bump into it in the congregation, they'd bump into it with their peers, they'd bump into it at home, and they'd bump into it at leadership. And if one of those things changes, if their home goes through a turmoil time, or if their pastor leaves, or if the youth leadership changes, there was still other assets that provided a robust network, a set of other resources to come alongside. So, 4 learnings from the Exemplar Youth Ministry Study. 1, it's about a living God. God is active and alive in congregations, in homes, in the lives of young people. And they talk about it. There's a language that's learned to talk about this active God. 2nd, it's about discipleship. It's about the activity of passing on a faith that matters, of this living God from one generation to the next, of people that know it from people that don't, and it's about walking with some practices and some rituals that help people discover a Christian way of life together. 3rd, it's about relationships. Yes, programs were involved. And some of them look pretty traditional, others not so much. But people always trumped programs. The stories that came out in these visits of these on-site were always of people. And programs got woven in there, but people always were where the energy came from. It was both peers and intergenerational pieces. It was their leadership. It was relationships in all those different directions. And then lastly, it's about leadership. It's about leading these communities to a place that matters. And it's shepherding this discipleship process. All right, you've heard me talk for a few minutes now. You get to talk with yourself. Not with yourself, with your table, sorry. Don't talk to yourself, that's bad, no. Find one other person, and I want you to take 2 minutes, and I want to say, what did you hear? What's troubling and what's hopeful? Go, 2 minutes. I don't know about you, but when I have sat with these studies, and I'll admit I've had a little more time to sit with them than some of you, one of the questions is, now what? So what? What will we do with this? I see it as a mixed bag, that there's some good news here and there's some bad news. So let's start with the bad news. The bad news is that the Christian way of life is no longer the norm. Being the church, being the Christian church in the world, is not the norm. Multiple faith messages are out in the world, and our young people are in those places day in and day out. The church is no longer in the center, and even if in your community there's a sense that church still has a place, often some of those places have their own set of obstacles because it's really a civil faith. It's really a club mentality often, rather than a vibrant way of discipleship or a way of life. And so all of us, wherever we are in our context, are dealing with this at some degree. We are living in a minority position, or a place where the culture is no longer going to come with us. So faith communities, this is our job, and guess what? We're not doing our job, if you will. If our job is to pass on this faith, to be nurturing faith for this mature Christian way of life, then we're not doing our job, and the world isn't going to do it either. That's the other bad news. Finally, church language that we've been accustomed to, the words that we use maybe in Luther League, or the words that we used 20 years ago, maybe had a way in the church to talk to the context. But the church language and the world language are now not the same. We need to discover new language if we're going to talk about these critical things. Words like justification and sanctification, and even words like Trinity and baptism and communion, are not ones that bring meaning, even for some that come on a regular basis into our congregations. But there's good news. Yay! Okay. Young people, teens, are open to faith and religion. And in some ways, maybe more so now than in some other times. There's not the pushback that we've seen before. And not only are they open to it, they're open to you kind of people and me kind of people, adults, parents, talking to them about it, engaging them, asking questions. There's a curiosity, and there's a sense that just talking to my peers isn't going to get me everything. So there's an openness to that. Third, actions are important. Our words are one thing about our faith, but if we talk about prayer but never are seen or witnessed or engaged in prayer, there's a gap. And guess what? Teens see the gap and believe it doesn't matter. Prayer is a practice that has lost its validity, or it's a practice that matters. I hang out on a weekly basis with a group of 6th, 9th graders. And we've been together as a small group for several years. And 2 weeks ago, my heart was, we were talking about sex, which should be get all excited because it's a current topic and whatever. We had a great conversation. But at the end, we asked for prayer requests. And one of the girls in our group said, I want to pray for my friends. They're twins, and they're atheists. That's what I want. I want our kids to care about their friends if they have a faith. And I want to engage in Christian practices in a meaningful group. And we prayed for her friends. And we've been praying together for 4 years on stuff they want to pray for, on the good days and the bad days. And we've had a journey, and prayer has been a part of it. It's actions. And the fourth thing about the good news is it's time to be creative and discover new ways. This generation is not going to receive it the same way, but that opens up huge possibilities. I think all of you will have this next one. The last thing I want us to do is say, what now? Thank you. Almost Christian, a book that might be sitting on your table, or some of you have in your hand. Kenda Chrissy Dean has been sitting with this study of actually both of these studies. She wasn't in either of them. It has been connected with looking at this data and thinking about it. And she wants to help us, the church, claim a particular story that's ours, that's not moralistic therapeutic deism. And she knows that's odd to the culture. But she's calling that forth. She's calling us to use our imagination. And finally, she's saying, you know what? I believe this faith actually makes a difference in the way we live. And if we're not cultivating that kind of faith, then we're not quite there yet. And so if we're going to be about this, about passing our traditions, ones that have lasted for generations and centuries, then here's the things that she wants to put in front of us. First, we have to learn, we adults that are accompanying these young people have to learn to be bilingual. We have to learn how to share the God story, but not in the language of previous generations, or maybe even in the language we heard it. But we need to help translate that into words that make sense to this generation. And then we need to have them learn to speak Christian. The particularities of this story, of this God story, and of our particular faith tradition that actually matter. So we need to learn the language of discipleship. We need to learn the practices of prayer and of worship and of service. And we need to tell and practice telling this Christian story and the story of the Bible from people like you and me that don't know it all, that some of it doesn't make sense, but we jump into it anyway. Well, we also have an ear and are listening to the language of the culture. And so we can bridge, so we can create a way to put those in conversation. So, second, communities of faith need to recapture an ancient idea called catechesis. And that's a church word for this. Passing on the faith from one generation to the next, from one group of people that have been brought into it to a group of people that it's new. That's catechesis. The idea here is not to pass on the doctrine or the beliefs. That's not the primary goal. The primary goal of catechesis is to invite people into a way of life. And as you invite and practice that, meaning gets wrapped into that. I remember when my 18-year-old first said the Lord's Prayer. My husband and I looked at each other. She was in preschool. And I looked at him and I said, "Did you teach her the Lord's Prayer?" I'm like, "I didn't teach her the Lord's Prayer." "Well, the grandparents must have done it." So we asked the grandparents, "Did you teach them the Lord's Prayer?" "None of the grandparents taught them the Lord's Prayer." Like, where did she learn the Lord's Prayer? Where did she learn the Lord's Prayer? Duh! But I didn't think about that. She learned it by coming on a weekly basis to the community of faith. I thought she was coloring. She was listening. Could she tell you what the Lord's Prayer meant as a preschooler? No. But she was brought into the faith through practices. So we need to be about recapturing this process. And third, we need to offer hope. The Christian way of life to this generation needs to bring a word of hope. They have been given all kinds of shortcuts to life, given promises that come up short, and it only is time before they discover the despair or the broken parts that these promises offer. We actually have beliefs around this, that the Christian way of life can bring us through those times and to give us a hope for the future. In a world that gives easy answers to complex issues, how are we going to get in that conversation? Are we going to have a thick enough, if you will, theology, or are we going to keep it pretty thin? So when they hit the hard parts, there's nothing to go to. Or are we going to open them to the mysteries of this God that cares for us more than we can imagine and forgives us more times than we can count and will bring us to a new place? We need to return to the gospel itself. We need to not know all the answers, but to put that in the center of our discussions and our discernment. And then we'll discover, what does it mean to be a God follower today? Not 20 years ago, not when we were growing up, but today. So, this series, this session, is about this. We, the team, want to help you in this ministry, in leading this discipleship process, in resting in this living word that God gives us, and of evoking your imagination around how we're going to do it. We want to help you in your own life, in the leaders that you're with, and in the young people you're with, cultivate a faith that actually matters today and has traction in this world. Second, we're committed to helping you, not only in this session, but in all the sessions that we put forth, to go back to some basics and to put some basics in conversation with these new findings, to say, how do we do this in imaginative ways, in a bicultural place, in a place that people are open but not quite sure of what that is. We believe that people, not programs, not big ideas, but people, are actually what pass on the faith tradition from one generation to the next, from people that are in the tradition to people that are wondering. Doctrine and beliefs are important, but people are what's critical. And in all of this, we believe that we can offer hope in the message that we have to offer, and that we can participate in what God's already up to around us. So it's a good time to be working with young people, to care about this, to be investing our time, to be the people of God that want to go on this discipleship journey with a generation. Now, this is a God-sized vision, I get that. And it's a God-sized mission. But we think it's a good time to join in. And remember, congregations matter. You matter. And young people matter. Thanks be to God. Let's pray. Gracious God, what a gift it is to be called here. Some of us said yes to an invitation we didn't quite understand that got us here. Some of us knew exactly what we were getting into and we said yes. Some of us still aren't sure what we're doing here. But you've brought us here. You've reminded us that some things stand the test of time. People, your story, traditions, intergenerational communities, trying to walk together and discover what it is to live a Christian way of life in the everydayness of our lives. But you've also reminded us that some things change. And we need to engage that and wonder about that and learn about that and listen to each other and be imaginative and creative. Take some risks. Don't worry about failure. Learn to speak bilingually, not only of your story, but to the culture. Thanks for being with us today. Thanks for what's coming ahead. And thanks for your promises that we can rest in every single day. All this we pray in your name. Amen.